Allan Meehan's rise from the streets of Miller to the top of Australia's most feared Bikie gang is a story of ambition, strategy, and raw violence. Born in 1987 into an Irish family, Meehan grew up where crime wasn't a rumor, it was a reality. By his 20s, he led the Rebels Cronulla chapter, earning the nickname Little General, and forged alliances with Sydney's criminal elite. Mentored by Comanchero heavyweight Mark Buddle, Meehan took control of Sydney operations and by 2021 became national president. His reign triggered assassinations, shootings, and a $3 million bounty on his head. But flaunting power online and defying law enforcement with a serious crime prevention order would bring his empire crashing down in just one brutal year. The foundation. Growing up in Miller too, understand Allan Meehan. You have to start where it all began, because his rise only makes sense when you look at the ground he came from. Miller wasn't just another public housing estate on Sydney's map. It was a place where street life wasn't a phase or a rumor, it was reality. Crime wasn't something you heard about on the evening news. It was part of the daily rhythm. The people around you weren't spectators to the underworld, they were connected to it. The men standing on corners weren't killing time, they were planning moves. Growing up there meant learning lessons no classroom could ever teach. Meehan was born in 1987 into an Irish family. Detail that carries real weight in Bikie culture. In that world, heritage matters. It shapes perception, loyalty, and identity. Over time, his Irish background became part of his image, something that worked in his favor. Miller gave him something just as important: instant credibility. He didn't need to pretend or prove he belonged. This was home. What set Meehan apart, though, was that he wasn't like everyone else around him. Whether it was sharp instincts, ambition, or a colder edge, something made him stand out early. He attended Trinity Catholic College in Auburn, a private school that exposed him to structure and discipline. But instead of pulling him away from the streets, it gave him another advantage. In the Bikie world, education isn't about reform, it's leverage. Meehan learned how to move between two worlds: the order of Catholic schooling and the raw violence of Sydney's streets. In the end, he chose his path. And like many driven young men from his environment, he chose the streets, the rebels' years. The rise of Little General, this is where Meehan's ascent really begins to take shape. Before the Comancheros, there was the Rebels motorcycle club and outlaw gang with Sirius standing in Sydney's criminal landscape. When Meehan joined, it was clear he'd found his element. He was young, ambitious, and knew exactly how to command respect. Within the club, he earned the nickname Little General. Bikie culture. Nicknames aren't handed out casually. They're a reflection of reputation. Little General spoke volumes: strategy, authority, leadership beyond his years. It meant people listened when he spoke. His rise through the Rebels was fast, even by outlaw standards. Still in his 20s, Meehan became president of the Cronulla chapter. Cronulla isn't just a coastal suburb, it's prime territory. Holding that position meant power, influence, and a real voice in high-level decisions. It confirmed that Meehan wasn't just another member. He was a figure to be taken seriously. During this period, he also built alliances that would define his future. One of the most important was his connection to the Vella family, especially Jesse Vella. The Vellas weren't ordinary bikers. They sat near the top of Sydney's outlaw hierarchy. Their reputation, reach, and connections carried enormous weight. Meehan understood exactly what that meant. He didn't build these ties out of loyalty or friendship. This was calculated, strategic. Every move was about positioning himself closer to the center of power. The Buddle factor, mentorship from the top Evan, while things were going well with the Rebels. Allan Meehan was already looking ahead. He wasn't thinking chapter-level power. He was thinking bigger. And that's where Mark Buddle enters the picture. Mark Buddle was a heavyweight in the Comanchero world, legendary. Feared and deeply dangerous. He'd been national president, steered the club through violent wars with rival Bikie gangs, and helped build a criminal network that stretched across the country. By 2016, police pressure had become so intense that Buddle fled Australia altogether. He resurfaced in Dubai, attempting to run the Comanchero operation from overseas, coordinating drug movements through encrypted phones and directing business across borders. Before leaving, Buddle put a structure in place to keep control. A 3-man leadership group would run the club in his absence: Mick Murray, the Melbourne chapter president; Tarek Zot, the national sergeant or sarge; and Allan Meehan running Sydney. That lineup is telling. Meehan wasn't the senior figure. He was the youngest and least experienced of the three. But Buddle clearly saw something others did not. It may have been Meehan's ambition. It may have been the fact that he controlled Sydney, the main entry point for drugs. Or it may have been that hard-to-define quality, the mix of intelligence, presence, and ruthless drive that separates followers from leaders. That direct link to Buddle, that guidance from the very top, completely reshaped Meehan's trajectory. The Prison Interlude 2014 to 2016. This is where the story takes a darker turn, and where Meehan's loyalty to the life becomes cleared in 2014. Meehan was arrested and convicted for possessing a firearm. He was sentenced to 2 years behind bars, serving time from 2014 to 2016. For most people, prison is a breaking point, a moment to pause, reflect, maybe even walk away from everything. For Meehan, it had the opposite effect. If anything, prison strengthened his standing. In outlaw Bikie culture, doing your time without complaint, keeping your mouth shut, and staying loyal are marks of respect. When Meehan walked free in 2016, he wasn't weakened by the conviction, he was reinforced by it. He'd shown he could handle pressure and survive the system without folding. Just 4 years later, in 2020, Meehan stepped into the role of president of the Comanchero's Canberra chapter after the previous leader was murdered. That move mattered. Strategically, it placed him closer to national influence. By 2021, he had taken full control of the Sydney chapter, putting himself at the operational core of the Comanchero's Australian network. From that point on, the pace picked up fast. The arrest that changed everything on April 28, 2022. The balance of power shifted overnight. Mick Murray, the Melbourne chapter president and the most senior figure in Buddle's leadership setup, was arrested and charged with murder. Prosecutors accused him of the execution style killing of Matan Burmi in 2019. This wasn't a small case. This was serious, high-level organized crime. Murray's arrest left a massive hole at the top of the Comanchero hierarchy. And suddenly, the question became unavoidable. Who would take over as national president? Tarek Zot believed it should be him. As sergeant-at-arms, he was seasoned, hardened, and deeply embedded in the club's major operations. On paper, Zot looked like the natural successor. But Allan Meehan saw an opportunity, and he moved decisively. More importantly, he had the numbers, the influence, and the leverage to back it up. He outmaneuvered Zot and secured the top job. This wasn't about ballots or formalities. This was Bikie politics at its rawest, who controlled the most territory, who commanded loyalty. And who was prepared to push harder than everyone else? Meehan pushed harder. The body fit. Gym assassination attempt, May 10, 2022, just 12 days later.
On May 10th.
2022, the internal power struggle spilled out into the open and did so violently. That Tuesday night around 8 p.m., Tarek Zot and his younger brother Omar walked into the Body Fit Fitness Center in Auburn in Sydney's West. It was meant to be routine, a normal gym visit, nothing out of the ordinary. Until it was, without warning, gunfire tore through the foyer. 2 men jumped out of a car parked outside and opened fire, spraying bullets into the entrance. Witnesses later described sheer panic, people diving for cover as the sound of automatic gunfire echoed through the gym. Omar was struck again and again. Bullets hit his arms, his stomach, his legs. He collapsed in the foyer and went into cardiac arrest. Despite frantic attempts to save him, he died there on the floor. Omar was 39 years old. Tarek Zot was hit 10 times. Police would later describe his body as shredded. He was shot in the face, head, arms, legs, stomach, and pelvis. He lost the vision in his right eye. The fact that he survived it all was extraordinary. When officers arrived, they immediately began CPR, and that intervention likely saved his life. The question everyone asked was simple, but loaded. Was this an attempt to assassinate Tarek Zot? Or was it a message about who now truly held power inside the Comanchero? The timing raised eyebrows. The shooting happened just days after Allan Meehan locked in his role as national president. It targeted one of the 2 men he had beaten to the top job. This wasn't subtle. It was a statement. Whether Meehan ordered it directly, or whether it was the result of a wider factional war within the club, the message was unmistakable. The hierarchy had changed, and defying it came with deadly consequences. The escalation. A summer of violence, if the Body Fit shooting was the first shot in a wider campaign. What followed turned Sydney into a pressure cooker. By September 2022, only 4 months later, Kyle Lafayette, one of Meehan's closest allies within the Comanchero, was shot in the face. He survived, but only just. He was rushed to Mater's Hospital with severe facial injuries. His rise within the club, now permanently scarred by violence. Around the same time, the bloodshed spread interstate. Levi Johnson, 23-year-old Comanchero member, was stabbed to death outside a gym in Brisbane. He was stabbed 6 times. Police later revealed the attack wasn't random. Investigators alleged that at least one of the attackers was trying to earn his place in an outlaw motorcycle gang by committing violence. What unfolded was a chain reaction. Meehan's takeover at the top destabilized the entire organization. Power vacuums opened. Members jockeyed for rank. Rival factions pushed against each other. This kind of chaos breeds violence, and it draws police attention fast. There was also another tension simmering beneath the surface. Even behind bars, McMurray's, the former power broker, was still a factor. He still had supporters, still had influence. People whispered about whether Meehan had truly secured full control, or whether this was only the opening chapter of a much longer, bloodier struggle for dominance. The Mark Buddle legacy. To understand what came next for Allan Meehan, you have to circle back to the man who helped put him there, Mark Buddle. What happened to Buddle would ripple straight through Meehan's world in July 2022. Buddle was arrested in Turkish northern Cyprus. By that point, he'd already been forced out of Dubai after footage surfaced showing him fighting tourists at a resort pool. It's a real fall for someone supposedly running a criminal empire from exile. Not long after, Turkish police, reportedly posing as FBI agents, stormed his home at gunpoint and took him into custody. From there, Buddle was deported to Turkey, processed, and prepared for extradition back to Australia. The architect of the modern Comanchero empire, the man who mentored Meehan and designed the power-sharing setup that lifted him to the top, was suddenly on a path back into Australian hands. For Meehan, this complicated everything. If Buddle returned and faced trial, there was the possibility his evidence could be used against other Comanchero figures. Just as important, Buddle still carried weight. He still had loyal followers. His reputation alone was enough to shift alliances. The moment he set foot back in Australia, the balance of power inside the club was at risk of shifting all over again. The lifestyle made him a target. There's a basic rule most serious criminals live by: stay invisible, keep a low profile. The less attention you draw, the longer you stay free. Allan Meehan either ignored that rule or decided it no longer applied to him. By 2022, newly installed as national president of the Comanchero, Meehan embraced the image of a kingpin. And he didn't just live it, he put it on display. Online, he became what many described as an Instagram gangster, using social media to project power, dominance, and success. He posted photos alongside gold-plated, custom-built Harley-Davidson motorcycles. These weren't expensive bikes, they were absurdly expensive, worth more than most people's homes. In the Bikie world, that kind of excess isn't decoration, it's a warning. He shared images with senior Comanchero figures Torexat, who had survived the assassination attempt, McMurray, his imprisoned rival, and high-ranking members from other chapters. In one especially bold post from September 2022, Meehan posed with Kyle LaFay, the ally who would be shot in the face just weeks later. His wardrobe told the same story. Designer labels, thousands of dollars per outfit, Gucci, Prada, heavy jewelry, luxury watches, stacks of cash laid out for the camera. He posted shots from luxury boats cruising Sydney Harbor vessels, reportedly costing around $25,000. Every image sent the same message: power, money, and confidence bordering on invincibility. Problem was, this lifestyle also handed police exactly what they need: a clear picture of who he was, where he moved, and how he operated. The Serious Crime Prevention Order, when the law gets creative in November 2021. Even before Meehan officially became national president, NSW police moved against him with a Serious Crime Prevention Order known as an SCPO. This wasn't a charge. It wasn't a conviction. It was something far more strategic. An SCPO is designed for people authorities believe are deeply involved in serious crime but can't yet prosecute. It works by placing strict controls on a person's life, making criminal activity almost impossible without technically charging them with an offense. The order issued against Meehan was among the toughest ever used. First, he was banned from communicating with 34 specific individuals, outlawed Bikies, and organized crime figures. For someone trying to run a national organization, that restriction was crippling. No calls, no meetings, no instructions. The entire command structure was cut off. Second, he was prohibited from using encrypted communication. No Signal, no WhatsApp, no secure phones. Every message carried the risk of being monitored. For organized crime, that's suffocating. Third, and most invasive, Meehan was required to inform NSW police of every place he stayed, even if it was just for one night. Within 24 hours, he had to provide details of where he went, who he was with, and the number plate of any vehicle he used. Detective Superintendent Grant Taylor made the intent clear. He has become a primary target of the NSW police force, he said. This is just one method of targeting him. We want to send a clear message. If you're going to be the national president of the Comanchero, this is what you can expect. It wasn't subtle. It was a calculated effort to shut Meehan down without firing a single shot, and by every measure, worked exactly as intended. A man trapped by his success. The cruel twist in Allan Meehan's rise is this: the same things that lifted him to the top also sealed his fate. His visibility, his reputation, the way he openly flaunted his lifestyle online, all of it made him impossible for police to ignore. He hadn't just become powerful, he'd become obvious. NSW Police Superintendent Grant Taylor made it clear that Meehan was more than just another target. He told the media that authorities were considering rolling out serious crime prevention orders against every national president of outlaw motorcycle gangs in the state. Meehan was the test case, the example of what happens when someone climbs too high in the criminal world and the order hit hard. Court documents later revealed recordings of Meehan reacting to the SCPO, and he was livid. In one intercepted conversation, he snapped, "A lot of people will put their rights in the bin because they don't want to upset Copper's brother." He goes, "Where are you moving to? None of your fucking business. I don't have to tell you." It sounded like defiance. But beneath that was frustration. This was a man realizing that for the first time. His power meant very little against legal controls. He couldn't threaten, intimidate, or bully away. The $3 million bounty then came something even more dangerous. Price on his head by late 2022. Meehan was warned that there was $3 million Australian dollars contract out on his life. $3 million for anyone willing to take the risk and remove him? Where that bounty came from has never been confirmed. It could have been rivaled Bikie clubs, Hells Angels, Bandidos, or others looking to weaken the Comanchero. It may have come from overseas criminal networks tied to drug trafficking and money flows. But there was a darker possibility. The threat may have come from inside his own world. Meehan's legal situation had turned him into a liability. The SCPO poisoned everything around him. Anyone seen with him risked breaching the order. Any operation involving him risked police scrutiny. In organized crime, liabilities don't get managed, they get erased. Intelligence reports suggested that within the broader Bikie landscape, some now saw Meehan as dangerous to be around. He brought heat. Too much attention. He had become radioactive. Running to Queenslanda, November 21st, 2022. Same day the NSW Supreme Court formally issued the SCP, Meehan made his move. He decided to run. He didn't outright tell police he was fleeing, but he did email them to say he was relocating. His lawyer later argued that Meehan believed the order only applied while he was physically in NSW, and that crossing the border would free him from its grip. That belief was wrong, but at the time, it shaped his decision. Meehan drove north with his family and settled in Benoa Waters on the Gold Coast, a quiet, affluent waterfront suburb better known for retirees and tourists than gang bosses. It was the last place anyone would expect to find the national president of Australia's most feared Bikie club. For a short while, it almost worked. He was out of NSW, away from constant pressure, living quietly. For a couple of months, he stayed under the radar, but he wasn't safe. The bounty closes in by the end of 2022. Police intelligence began painting a grim picture. Encrypted messages were circulating. Words like cleanup were being used. There were discussions about a contract. Most alarming of all were reports that someone was actively searching for Meehan on the Gold Coast. This put law enforcement in an extraordinary position. The Australian Federal Police, alongside state authorities, weren't just trying to arrest him. They were racing to get to him first. If Meehan was killed by a rival or a hired hitman, the fallout would be catastrophic: destroyed evidence, retaliation attacks, and another violent chain reaction across the underworld. So police made their move. The arrest, February 9th, 2023. On the morning of February 9th, 2023, it finally caught up with Allan Meehan. Gold Coast major crime detectives arrived at a waterfront home in Benoa Waters, where Meehan had been staying. They executed a search warrant and arrested the 35-year-old national president of the Comanchero motorcycle club. He was taken to the Southport Watch House, processed, and held while NSW police moved quickly. Authorities applied for his extradition, alleging Meehan had breached the serious crime prevention order by failing to notify police of his new address and by continuing to use encrypted communication devices while hiding out in Queensland. Meehan's legal team pushed back. They argued he hadn't fled to dodge the order, he'd left because his life was in danger. They said NSW police themselves had warned him about the $3 million bounty, and that moving interstate was about survival, not defiance. Detective Superintendent Grant Taylor wasn't buying it. He acknowledged police sometimes warned Bikie figures about threats, but pointed to one detail that mattered most: the timing. Meehan left NSW on the very day the SCPO was issued. To police, it didn't look like self-preservation. It looked like someone running from restrictions he knew were about to cripple him. Either way, Meehan's time in Queensland was over. He was being sent back to NSW to face the consequences. The court battle Meehan first appeared in Southport Magistrates Court, where his lawyers applied for bail. The answer was no. The magistrate ordered him held in custody. He was transferred back to NSW. Once in Sydney, Meehan tried again, this time at the Downing Centre local court. He offered to surrender his passport. He offered a $20,000 surety. He told the court his family depended on him and that being locked up would put them at risk. None of it worked. Bail was denied again. The man who had once commanded Australia's most feared Bikie gang was now just another inmate, stuck in the system, staring down charges with very few moves left. The plea deal by July 2023. The reality had set in. The case against Meehan was strong. Police had evidence he'd breached the SCPO, used encrypted devices, and failed to report where he was living. There were records, intercepts, clear paper trails. Rather than roll the dice at trial and risk a heavier sentence, Meehan's lawyers cut a deal. He agreed to plead guilty to one count of breaching the SCPO. The outcome surprised many. He was fined $5,000 and given a 2-year community corrections order. No prison sentence. For one of the toughest control orders ever issued, it was a remarkably light result. It suggested prosecutors either had concerns about proving the full case in court, or they simply wanted a conviction on the books and to move on. Either way, Meehan walked free, but his reign was over. The moment he was arrested, the Comanchero began preparing his replacement. Reports later named Bamir Saravicha Melbourne-based house painter with Syria standing inside the club as the new national president. Officially, Meehan stepped aside. Unofficially, the whispers never stopped, that he still had influence, that he was still giving direction, that even without the title, Allan Meehan hadn't truly disappeared. He'd just moved into the shadows. Deposed king. What happened to Allan Meehan after his release is, in many ways, more revealing than everything that came before it. The former national president of Australia's most feared Bikie gang didn't vanish. He didn't move somewhere quiet and try to blend into normal life. Instead, by most accounts, he stayed close to the action and tried to hold on to influence. Meehan was spotted at the Comanchero National Run in Victoria, surrounded by members, still commanding respect despite no longer holding an official title. Intelligence reports suggested his pull inside the club hadn't evaporated. Bamir Saravicha may have worn the badge of national president, but real influence was still believed to run through Sydney, Meehan's territory. Some in the underworld believed Meehan was effectively still calling the shots, just without the spotlight. Others thought he'd been pushed aside, keeping his head down and letting the next generation step forward. The reality likely sat somewhere between those two views. The broader Comanchero turmoil, Meehan's rise and fall, didn't happen in a vacuum. It unfolded during one of the most unstable periods that Comanchero had ever faced. McMurray was still battling serious allegations over the 2019 murder of Madame Burmi. Mark Buddle had been arrested and was facing extradition back to Australia. Tarek Zadhu survived the Body Fit gym ambush, was also facing charges, and had clearly grown disillusioned with the life. By March 2024, reports emerged that Zathardan Sergeant d'Armes, who lost an eye and nearly died in Auburn, was allegedly trying to walk away altogether. He wanted out. He was done. The empire Buddle built, and Meehan briefly controlled, was beginning to fracture. The violence hadn't stopped. The drug trade hadn't slowed. The leadership was unstable, loyalties were shaky, and the organization was increasingly exposed both to police pressure and to its own internal cracks. What Meehan's story teaches us so. What does Allan Meehan's story really show us? First, it highlights how quickly power can change hands in the underworld. Meehan went from being Mark Buddle's chosen successor to national president to sitting in custody in less than 2 years. In that world, the climb is fast and the fall is faster. Second, it shows how policing has changed. The Serious Crime Prevention Order wasn't about locking someone up. It was about cutting them off, disrupting their ability to operate, and it worked. It didn't require proving a single dramatic crime, only establishing involvement in serious criminal activity. Third, it exposes the harsh logic of organized crime. Man's rise attracted violence. His rivals were targeted. He became a target himself. Violence wasn't a side effect of his power. It was part of the system that created and destroyed it. And once he became a liability, the same forces that elevated him were ready to erase him. And finally, it shows the trap at the heart of the Bikie world. There is no clean exit. Even after a guilty plea and a light sentence, Meehan couldn't just walk away. He remained on police radar, a potential target for enemies, and a symbol of a club in turmoil. In the end, Allan Meehan wasn't just brought down by law enforcement or rivals. He was trapped by the very world he helped build. The Instagram Gangster's Final. Lesson: remember Meehan's Instagram those posts, showing off custom Harley's designer outfits, stacks of cash. That likely sealed his fate in the modern world. You can't run a serious criminal operation while advertising your success online. Every photo becomes a breadcrumb trail. Every post gives police something to work with. Probable cause, names, faces, connections. You're not just flexing, you're documenting your own world. Meehan learned that lesson the hard way. His social media presence didn't just draw attention, it turned into evidence. His lifestyle was public, constant, impossible to ignore, and once that spotlight was on him, there was no stepping out of it. Bikie figures who last. They're the ones nobody ever hears about. They keep their heads down. They live quietly. Meehan had drive and brains, but what he lacked was discipline. He wanted people to see his success. He wanted recognition, and that, more than anything else, was his undoing. Closing statement: Allan Meehan. His reign as national president of the Comanchero Motorcycle Club lasted barely a year. In that short window, he tightened his grip through violence, broadcast his wealth online, and made himself the #1 target for law enforcement. When the pressure came, he ran. In running, he breached the very orders designed to contain him. And once he was caught, his grip on power was finished. Was it worth it? Did 1 year at the top outweigh the legal battles, the attempts on the lives of people around him, the $3 million price placed on his own head? Only Meehan can answer that. What we do know is this: he's still out there, still connected to Sydney's Bikie scene, still holding on to whatever influence he can from a much smaller position. The club he once ruled has moved on. New leaders have stepped in. The Comanchero continues, still trafficking, still violent, still operating, but Allan Meehan's time in the spotlight is over, and his story stands as a warning in the criminal underworld. The higher you climb, the harder you fall, and the deeper you hit when you land.